What a male wants, what a male needs. What does she want? That's what we're talking about today. What does Melisandre want? What does she need? Where's her story going? We know that she loves fire and hates sleeping. And we know that she came from Asshai looking for Azor Ahai, both in Westeros in general and in the Flames in particular. We know that she wants to make more shadow babies with Davos or Jon or who knows who else? Any man whose fires burn high and hot. And we know that Mel can sense that the wall is a hinge of the world that will make all of her spells stronger and her shadows more terrible. Even more so than at Asshai by the Shadow, which is probably also a hinge of the world. Thanks for watching my Asshai by the Shadow What Happened video. And most dreadfully, we know that Melisandre occasionally feeds human beings to the sacrificial fires. Be they traitors to the crown or royal bastards with a drop of king's blood, or even grungy old wildlings glamored up to look like kings beyond the wall. Mel doesn't only burn people, though. She's known to set fire to things like 8-foot-long magical horns graven with runes of the first men, or 8,000-year-old weirwood trees planted by the first kings of the first men. She can even zap a skin changer's animal familiar right out of the sky. The Lord of Light has fiery talons, Jon Snow. And we kind of intuitively feel that if the circumstances were right, Melisandre might just walk into the fire herself. Now, there are, of course, plenty of theories about Jon Snow's resurrection. I'm definitely guilty of throwing a few out there. And we're going to discuss Jon's resurrection today in more detail than ever before, anywhere that I've ever done, ever. But as far as Mel goes, the question is, what about after that? Will her story be over, or does she have some further destiny beyond Jon's resurrection? And what about Jon's resurrection? I mean, will she be raising him from the dead, as in turning his corpse into a firewhite like Beric? What about potentially freeing him from otherish possession? Because I do think the others are going to steal his body. Mel might also be helping to guide Jon's spirit back from Ghost, the wolf, aptly named Wolf Ghost, back to Jon's body, which will hopefully be reanimated and cleansed of otherish possession. So Mel could be involved in any and all of that, as well as Bloodraven and Bran. We'll mention them today too. And the question here, for Mel in particular, is what will be the cost? And will there be any weird sex magic involved? Inquiring minds want to know, including Melisandre's. Kidding aside, I don't know why I wrote that in the script. Sex magic is no laughing matter. You shouldn't just plunge into that, carefree, frankly. But yes, sex magic aside, Ifrelore is an actual entity, which is something that I and Grey Waste Tim have convinced myself of. Ifrelore is an entity, a Lovecraftian space demon. Then how is it working through Melisandre to enact its will? And what will that mean for Melisandre? So as you can see, this isn't going to be a short video because Melisandre's fate is no simple matter. George Martin has big plans for Melisandre in the Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring. And that's what I'm going to show you today. So if you appreciate in-depth videos like this one and the Asshai video and, you know how I do it, then please do support my hard work by leaving a comment, making sure you're subscribed, and even consider joining our Patreon or YouTube channel member squisher thing. The thing.
John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave.
So the first place we need to start with understanding where Melisandre's plot is going is fanaticism, specifically Melisandre's fanaticism. If you're a religious fanatic, it's really much better to exist inside of a fantasy story than in real life, and fortunately for Melisandre, that's right where she is. Religious fanatics of every kind, they always want to believe in an alternate spiritual reality, which may or may not exist in real life. I am not attempting to rule on that matter. I would call myself an agnostic, but the point is, it's not something anyone can prove. But in fantasy, that's not the case. Magic is real. Mel does do some parlor tricks and political posturing to enhance the perception of her power, and she also does that with magic too, using her glamored appearance to increase, people's fear and awe of her. But at the core of her power is real magic. That's why she believes, and that's why other people believe. If Hot Pie were banging on about it is written in ancient books of Asshai, I don't think anyone would care that much. Just like no one would care if Melisandre was telling you how to bake a pie. It's not relevant. And Melisandre doesn't need to eat anyway. More on that in a moment. So when I was taking a look at Melisandre's core beliefs, they seem to crystallize into 5 main things. Number 1, fire is power. Number 2, behind the force of fire magic is an entity called R'hllor. Number 3, this R'hllor, R'hllor, as Arya calls him, can look into the future, wants to shape the future, and reveals this future to his disciples through the flames. Number 4, the most important thing in the entire world is to enact R'hllor's will about the future. And number 5, R'hllor's will chiefly pertains to Azor High Reborn. He's R'hllor's champion, and he's the only hero who can defeat the forces of the darkness. He or she, it does seem like potentially it could be a she, at least one of them. Three Heads has the dragon. The language misled us all for 1,000 years. So I think Melisandre is basically right about most of that. It's really just her specific interpretations of some of the visions in the flames that she gets wrong. And maybe the ethics part. There's a little bit of a lack of ethics. Or you could say that she has basically no ethics save for enacting R'hllor's will, because to her it's all about defeating the others, and that's worth anything. So let's review. Number 1, yes, fire definitely a source of power. Whether or not R'hllor exists, we know that's true. So none other than Marwyn the Mage, Archmaester of the Higher Mysteries at the Citadel, he tells us that all Valyrian sorcery is rooted in blood and fire, and that does seem to be true. The 14 flames upon which the Valyrian Empire is built may also be directly sources of fire magic. So we've got the Valyrians and the R'hllors tapping into the power of fire to work sorcery, but then there's also just randos like the dude in Karth who was climbing the fiery ladder when Dany came there. And then of course anybody using a glass candle has to wake fire from dragon glass to use it. So yeah, fire, definitely a source of magic and power, as well as a way to see visions and glimpse into the future. And I've always found it interesting that the shifting flames show these shifting shapes of the future, which is more hazy, while the fixed flame of the glass candle gives you real-time communication that is basically true and accurate. Although, of course, we don't know the full limitations of the glass candles. And that essentially was belief number 2, that R'hllor can see the future and reveals the future in the flames. Whether or not R'hllor exists, the future is being revealed in the flames. That is happening. The visions that one can see in the flames, they essentially communicate the same way that dreams do, through symbolic language. That's because symbols represent concepts which come before language. Language is always describing an idea or a concept. But dreams and flame visions seem to communicate directly at the conceptual level. And then to get specific about the power that Melisandre can draw from fire, as I alluded to earlier, she does seem to have burned Orell's eagle out of the sky, which she refers to as R'hllor's fiery talons. Conjuring fire magic does seem like an obvious power for R'hllor to have, so that's not hard to understand. However, it is interesting that she's telling Jon Snow about how she burned a warg's spirit out of their animal. I don't know if that's foreshadowing for anything. I do know it is we'll talk about it. And before you go, oh no, I'm not watching another David Lightbringer video where he talks about how Ghost is going to die. Next week, I'm going to have a video about how Ghost is going to be fire-whited. I threw this out as an aside one time. I'm convinced it's going to happen. Jon and Ghost will both be rezzed, so don't complain. Melisandre also does that little ritual with the leeches. That's both blood magic and fire magic because she's burning the leeches. And overall, the efficacy of this ritual is highly questionable. Edric Storm does have king's blood, so maybe it did something. But all those kings that died have other explanations behind their deaths. Although you almost feel bad for Balon Greyjoy when you think about the fact that the Faceless Men and Melisandre were both using magic to try to kill him. He didn't have much chance, so deserved to die, so we're not sad. Anyway, one fire magic power that Mel hasn't tapped into yet, but probably can, is the fiery R'hllorist resurrection, the last kiss. And Thoros actually explains to us how it works in perfect detail. It's a standard ritual that all R'hllorist priests are taught, and normally they just breathe a little bit of fire down into the deceased's lungs as a sort of purification ritual. It's pretty straightforward. But for some reason in Westeros, with Beric and Thoros, the fiery kiss breathed spiritual fire into Beric and reanimated his corpse. And it also called some part of his ghostly spirit back to reanimate to the corpse. I think this whole process is actually shadow binding. We're essentially shadow binding the ghost to the corpse. And I talked about that more in the Shadow Binders video. Thanks for watching. So yeah, Mel really should be able to do this, both because all priests are taught the last kiss, but also because I think it's shadow binding and Mel's a shadow binder. And in fact, we actually have no idea whether or not Melisandre knows how to do R'hllorist resurrection. She may know all about it, or she may have to put it together with Jon at the Wall. So as far as Melisandre's belief that R'hllor is real, well, I talked about this a lot more in the Shadowbinders video as well as the live stream, Are the Gods Real? So check those ones out, and it does seem that Martin is softly implying the presence of Lovecraftian intelligences like Nyarlathotep and Cthulhu and Sethalgwa, I said it. And these entities would potentially be the forces behind the religions of ice and fire. So your Great Other, R'hllor, the drowned god. And so yes, when Melisandre is using the magic of the shadow, she very well may be putting herself in touch with some sort of shadow demon entity. That's all a little speculative though. Really the main thing for the story is the Azor High prophecy. That's what Mel is working so hard to help make come true. I think we do have to assume there is some validity to it. It's a tricksy prophecy, but it's not meaningless, obviously. And Melisandre's belief really boils down to the need to find and empower Azor High Reborn to save the world. She thinks it's Stannis, of course, and is being shown over and over again in the flames that it's Jon, and one assumes she'll figure that out pretty soon. And eventually when Daenerys comes to Westeros, Mel will hear about the dragons and start putting this all together, one would assume. Or Melisandre may even begin seeing Daenerys in a flame vision at some point, probably when Dany starts moving towards Westeros, and her sort of destiny line of fate moved to intersect with Melisandre's. I think that's why Mel is seeing Jon a lot right now, as well as Bloodraven and Bran, because those are the next three major important people that her story is going to be caught up with. And then just to follow up on the ethics thing, like I said, she's willing to do anything to, help Azor High Reborn defeat the others, to the point where she's essentially not worried about becoming the monster to defeat the monster. That's essentially Davos's argument when he's talking about the life of one child, Edric Storm, being worth everything. And that's in response to Stannis saying, hey, if we sacrifice one child to save the world, isn't that okay? And Davos is like, no, because then you're becoming the monster to defeat the monster. You know better than the ones you're defeating. But Mel doesn't see it that way, and I'm pretty sure the space demon god in the shadow doesn't care about that kind of stuff. And so this is where I think George is implying that Melisandre is essentially wrong. That her fanaticism, while it may be based in real magic and beliefs, has gone too far and taken her to a place of inhumanity. And you'll note that Jon and Dany are heroes. They have the opposite idea. They are constantly risking their own royal personages or whatever for basically anybody, the downtrodden, the wildlings, the slaves. So yeah, we could see two very different philosophies with Melisandre versus Jon and Dany. And that's going to make for an interesting climax.
The stars above in heaven are looking kindly down.
All right, let's go a little deeper on Melisandre's funky physiology, which is to say she is turning into a fire other, a fiery equivalent of a White Walker, or perhaps Night's Queen, you might say. And this transformation apparently is the price tag of Melisandre's fanatical devotion to R'hllor. Because when you give yourself to R'hllor, you give everything, including your ethics. And this is something that Stannis Baratheon knows well. I know the cost. Last night, gazing into that hearth, I saw things in the flames as well. I saw a king, a crown of fire on his brows, burning, Davos. His own crown consumed his flesh and turned him to ash. Do you think I need Melisandre to tell me what that means? Or you? So like I said, the cost is everything, and accordingly Melisandre says that R'hllor speaks through a language of fire, ash, cinders, and pain. Melisandre is willing to pay that price and knows that she's paying that price, just as Stannis does. And this is part of their fanatical devotion. They've given themselves over to the cause 100%, and so they are sometimes willing to give other people over to the cause 100%, even if they are not willing. And by the cause, I mean a giant bonfire. So the goal of pretty much all the Song of Ice and Fire magicians seems to be transcending humanity. The Undying Warlocks are doing that, the Green Seers are doing that, Euron is trying to do that. And transcending humanity, while it may be painted as great and glorious, onward and upward, well, it means leaving humanity behind. And that's something we should think about before we do that. In any case, we're not talking about transhumanism, we're talking about giving yourself over to R'hllor. And just as the king in Stannis' vision had his flesh consumed, Melisandre is also giving her flesh over to R'hllor. R'hllor provided her with all the nourishment her body needed, but that was something best concealed from mortal men. Yeah, I agree. That's best kept to yourself. Not needing to eat, that does freak people out because it's inhuman. Melisandre is not human. She's powered by R'hllor, and that's a little disconcerting. Shout out to all this great, disconcerting Melisandre artwork that you're seeing throughout the video. Artwork by human artists, of course, because we don't do the transhumanism here. And honestly, it does feel increasingly more cool to be a person on YouTube, feels like more unusual. In any case, that's why the Strangler, one of the strongest poisons in existence, did not work on Melisandre. Her biology is no longer human. And along the same lines, Melisandre doesn't need to sleep, or almost doesn't. So as you can see here, Melisandre has been pulling an all-nighter, as she often does. She has no time for sleep and very little need for it. Apparently, dreams are whisperings of the other, the great other. And I guess so is food. I don't know. But the point is, yeah, instead of sleeping, she just stares into the fire. And some nights she drowses a bit, but never for more than an hour. And one day she prays she will not need to sleep at all. So this is clearly describing a gradual transformation process. She hopes that soon she won't need to sleep at all. So she's probably not a resurrected person. And I think Moqorro is similar. If you recall, he survived for 10 days at sea with no raft, no fresh water, nothing. And so he must not need to sleep or eat either, I suspect. So then we get a little more detail on Mel's funky physiology when she experiences her fire vision in her one chapter in A Dance with Dragons. The Red Priestess shuddered. Blood trickled down her thigh, black and smoking. The fire was inside her, an agony, an ecstasy, filling her, searing her, transforming her. Shimmers of heat traced patterns on her skin, insistent as a lover's hand. Strange voices called to her from days long past. Melanie, she heard a woman cry. A man's voice called Lot 7. She was weeping, and her tears were flame, and still she drank it in. So I think what we're being shown here is that each use of fire magic is further searing and transforming Melisandre. And that blackened blood sure seems like a sign of abnormal physiology. And I don't think that's just a poetic description either. We also see the black blood when she gives birth to the shadow baby. As you can see, her blood is not just black, but black as ink. So George really wants us to notice it. And of course, there's the shadow baby. We also notice that. She's giving birth to it. So yeah, her womb is a shadow factory, not a normal womb. And as a quick note on symbolism and parallels, take notice of the agony and ecstasy language. We saw that in both quotes, as you can see on the screen. And this is essentially pointing back to Nissa Nissa's cry of agony and ecstasy that created Lightbringer, and also effectively created Azor Ahai as a champion of fire with a burning sword. So the reason for this parallel would seem to be that Melisandre is also trying to create Lightbringer, and she is willing to give her own life, gradually or potentially suddenly, we'll get to that, in order to help Azor Ahai be reborn or to do his thing. Because that is, after all, R'hllor's agenda. In the first agony and ecstasy scene, Melisandre is, of course, seeing Jon Snow, and in the shadow baby scene, she's giving birth to a shadow being. And this makes me wonder if resurrecting Jon Snow is going to be akin to giving birth to a shadow being. More on this to come as well. So if we sort of play out the process that Melisandre is undergoing, each use of fire magic is transforming her further into a being powered by R'hllor, and she is seemingly almost to some final point where she will be finally free of dreams. So the logical endgame to this is Fire Other, essentially the total replacement of her physical body with one sustained by pure fire magic. And this could even be how we got Night's Queen, who is the first user of ice magic on record. Of course, one of my favorite Durrandon theories is that Night's Queen is essentially an ice sorceress equivalent to Melisandre, but using ice. And both Durrandon and myself believe that Night's Queen was actually the first Other, meaning that she transformed herself first and then was able to give birth to White Walkers. Melisandre's black shadow children do in many ways parallel the White Shadows, the Others, who are the children of Night's Queen. So you can check out more about that in these videos that are next to me on the screen. So the important thing to realize here is that Melisandre is almost there. She's so close, you guys, so close. And it seems like one more giant act of fire magic might push her over the edge. After all, what's the point of showing us a red priestess who's almost done transforming, if not to have them finish? So let's hope Melisandre gets to finish. Okay, that's enough. That's enough. And that one more giant act of fire magic would obviously be Jon's resurrection. That is the logical choice. There is, after all, specific foreshadowing of Melisandre walking into Jon's funeral/resurrection pyre, just as Daenerys walked into Drogo's funeral pyre. And that's going to be a whole section later in the video, so keep watching, and we'll also get into what new powers Melisandre could have were she to complete the process of turning into a Fire Other.
John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave, but his soul goes marching on.
Man, wolf, man. It's worse than man, bear, pig. It's like man, bear, pig, but it's worse. No, it's Jon. I'm talking about Jon's resurrection, and Melisandre's involvement in Jon's resurrection is definitely not a show-only thing. A Dance with Dragons actually came out, if you remember, before Game of Thrones, the TV show, ever started. And pretty much everyone after A Dance with Dragons was expecting Jon to be resurrected, and all of us were looking at Melisandre, so this is an old idea, and it's well established in the books. Death, thought Melisandre. The skulls are death. The flames crackled softly, and in their crackling she heard the whispered name, Jon Snow. His long face floated before her, limned in tongues of red and orange, appearing and disappearing again, a shadow half seen behind a fluttering curtain. Now he was a man, now a wolf, now a man again. But the skulls were here as well. The skulls were all around him. So a man and then a wolf and then a man again. This is very obviously describing Jon's second life and then resurrection process. This is the same book where we got the Varamir Six Skins prologue that explained all about second life. So Jon, having just been cut across the throat, that was his jugular, bleeding out. His spirit is now in Ghost these 14 years. And he will be a man again when Melisandre resurrects him inside of a fire, which is where she sees Jon. In fact, he's limbed in tongues of fire. So he's a burning man inside a Relorist fire. And he's also a shadow. And of course, pretty much all the dead things are regarded as shadows. Cold Hands is a shadow, the White Walkers are shadows, and all shadows seemingly are stopped by the magical wards that we find in places like Storm's End and the Wall, presumably the Winterfell crypts, and probably all the old First Man castles. So as we discussed in our Jon Azor Ahai video, Melisandre's dreams are not only showing her Jon Snow when she asks to see Azor Ahai reborn, they're freaking whispering his name to her. The flames are speaking. It's like Rice Krispies. They're talking, and they're saying Jon Snow. So that's literally more specific than any other dream vision in this entire series. And the whole point of this vision seems to be to show Melisandre that she needs to help resurrect Jon because he's Azor Ahai and needs the reborn part. And obviously Daenerys is Azor Ahai too. Don't take me for one of those Jon cells, quote unquote. Three Heads has the dragon people. Come on, let's try to keep up. And speaking of keeping up, Melisandre obviously has not figured this out yet. She still thinks it's Stannis. But once she figures out it's Jon, again, her fanatical devotion to the Pope, not the Pope, but to R'hllor, that means that nothing will stop Mel from resurrecting Jon, whatever it takes. And I'm going to tell you exactly what it takes by the end of this video. So then later, Melisandre tells Jon about seeing him in her flames, and it leads to a little bit of a misunderstanding. So as you can see, her red lips curled into a probably disconcerting smile, and she says, "I've seen you in my fires, Jon Snow." And Jon, taking it literally, "Is that a threat? Do you mean to burn me?" But of course, that's what we're talking about. Melisandre is going to burn Jon Snow, only it's going to be a resurrection fire. So then as the conversation goes on, you can see that Mel says, "Great is the lore that raised the wall, great the spells locked beneath its ice, it's a hinge of the world." And then she says, "This is my place as it is yours, and soon enough you may have grave need of me." So Jon may have grave need of Melisandre. I don't know if she intended that as a pun, but obviously we can see it. Jon's gonna need her help when he's moldering in the grave. That's right, Jon Snow's body is a moldering in the grave. So as you can see, Jon's resurrection is pretty well set up in the books. It's going to be a man and then a wolf and then a man again. And George has flat out said that Beric is a kind of foreshadowing for Jon. Beric is, of course, a fire white with a burning sword who leads a brotherhood whose task is to defend the people of Westeros. As we've discussed many times, once Jon is a fire white, he'll be able to light his own sword on fire, just like Beric. He won't even need to stab Daenerys to make a Lightbringer sword. Very silly idea. And Melisandre, obviously, as a priestess of R'hllor, can make fire whites. She can make Jon a fire white specifically. And that's what all these quotes that we just read seem to be foreshadowing. I'll have a little more to come on fire whites later in the video because there's also foreshadowing that Jon will not only be a fire white, but that he will lead a brotherhood of fire whites. And I'll also bring up the King of Winter symbolism again. You know, the stuff that implies that the real embodiment of a King of Winter should be some sort of burning green man. But let's stick with man, wolf, man for now and go a little deeper on Melisandre and Ghost. And that is why I wore my Ghost shirt. This is probably the most Ghost that we've talked in a video ever.
On the grave of old John Brown.
All right, so let's talk about what is, in retrospect, the most foreshadowy name in all of A Song of Ice and Fire, which is Jon's wolf, Ghost. Jon's ghost is literally going to be in his wolf, who's named Ghost, so that's not very cryptic. Do you think I need Melisandre to tell me what that means? Or David Lightbringer? No, that's right there on Front Street. And as you may recall, there is kind of a crazy scene with Melisandre and Ghost at the wall. And yeah, it's kind of a doozy. And it has a lot to say about just how Melisandre is going to facilitate the man-wolf-man process. So let's just go bit by bit here. She gazes at Ghost and says, "May I touch your trail off, wolf?" The thought makes Jon uneasy, best not. And then Melisandre draws attention to the fact that he's named Ghost. So yes, this is very funny. Ha ha, may I touch your wolf? Kind of like Dunk saying Tanzel is just tall enough for puppets. But of course, if we're looking for foreshadowing here, Melisandre is asking to touch Jon's ghost, and that's just what she's going to need to do in order to resurrect him, because his spirit is going to be in his wolf. So next we see that Melisandre can call Ghost to her, and she may be using some sort of song compulsion magic or something else, who knows. It could even be a magic powder, such as Jake and Hagar used on Whise's dog at Harrenhal, just a powder that causes love instead of hate. But whatever Melisandre is doing here, she was very confident that it would work, and it clearly did work. Ergo, Melisandre can literally call Ghost the wolf to her, and will probably figure out how to call Jon's ghost back to his body. It's interesting that she's using a song here. She also sings in the tongue of a Shai when she's doing Stannis' Lightbringer ceremony, and so she may again use song magic when she resurrects Jon. That may be a part of it. So as soon as Mel calls Jon's ghost, he lets out a white breath. So think W-I-G-H-T, breath. And I would say that this signifies Mel forcing out the otherish white possession with her fire magic, forcing the cold white spell out of his body like a cold puff of air. And this again happens right when Mel calls Jon's ghost. Then we see all the fire symbolism kick in, because that's where Mel's going to be calling Ghost to. That's where Jon's body is going to be, inside of fire. So just going in order, Ghost's eyes blaze like Melisandre's, but Mel's eyes blaze with the fire of R'hllor. Mel's warmth calls to Ghost's, but Mel's warmth is again R'hllorist fire. Ghost usually isn't so warm. He gets warmer when Melisandre's around, if you take the meaning. And of course, the goal here is to fill Jon's body with R'hllorist fire and give him a pair of red star eyes. So then in this next bit, we see that Mel's hold over Ghost is even stronger than Jon's, which is what is so weird about this passage. But of course, if Melisandre is going to, in any sense, call Ghost to walk into a fire or into some sort of sacrifice, then that would need to be some pretty strong magic. Now, Ghost looks at Jon like a stranger here, and Jon actually has a lot of stranger symbolism. And here I'm talking about the stranger from the Faith of the Seven, who is depicted as a shadow with 2 stars for eyes. The wanderer from far places. Jon Snow, when resurrected, will be a shadow with stars for eyes. And then there's that time where he thinks about, if he broke his vows and left the wall to go help Robb fight his war, he'd always be a stranger in black. So this is kind of a commentary on Jon's archetype. He's already a shadow in black by being a Night's Watchman, but when he is resurrected, he will be the stranger version of Azor Ahai, a shadow with stars for eyes. So that's why Ghost is looking at him as a stranger right at this moment in the sequence. Mel calls Jon's ghost, Jon lets out his white breath, and now he is a starry-eyed shadow. Mel then says there is power in Ghost that Jon will need to use. And yes, that's literally true. Ghost is Jon's soul jar. That's where he's going to hang out while George writes The Winds of Winter, resurrects Jon. It's coming. It's coming. And as we discussed in the Cold Hands video, thanks very much for watching, Jon's soul being stored in his animal familiar is the reason why he's going to turn out a better zombie than Beric or Lady Stoneheart. Neither of them had an animal familiar to preserve their spirit, but Jon does. And to get the spirit out of the wolf, as you can see, it seems like it's going to require burning the wolf body. But as I always try to reassure people, and I've been saying this for years, we know that the human skin changer and the animal spirits begin to merge pretty soon into Second Life. And that means that if we move Jon's spirit from the wolf back to his body, well, Ghost's wolf spirit is going to come along with. Jon's not going to be a lonely zombie. It's going to be some merged man-wolf presence. So that's why we've got to sacrifice the wolf body, and it's definitely going to be in fire. All of this language suggests Melisandre calling Ghost to a fire, where his eyes will blaze like Melisandre's with the fire of R'hllor. And as we mentioned, Mel has already forced a skin changer spirit out of its animal familiar with fire. And that was Orell's eagle, of course. So yeah, that's how she's going to do it again. So yes, the scene is going to be very sad, but when you read it, just remember that Ghost is going back into Jon too. And not only that, Ghost's eyes blazing red, like red stars. I think this is one of the many clues that Ghost's wolf body is actually going to be fire-whited too, along with Jon's body. And that will be the subject of next week's video. Fire-white Ghost, or Direwolf Firewolf. I'm not sure what I'm going to call it, but yeah, check that out next week. Ghost is going to be fire-whited. And this will all happen when Winds of Winter prediction time, the red comet reappears in time for Jon's resurrection. And then final note, Mel, along with referring to the power in Jon's wolf, she's also referring to the power in the wall, the fact that it's a hinge of the world and it's got power locked in its spells. And most importantly, she's talking about how, as a hinge of the world, it's going to make any shadows that she creates here more terrible. And since resurrecting Jon will be making Shadow Jon, it seems likely that Melisandre will be using this hinge of the world wall magic to help resurrect Jon.
They hanged him for a traitor, they themselves the traitor crew.
All right, kissing Jon. If you thought this was going to be about, R'hllor's fiery kiss, no, it's about kissing Jon. Well, it's about both. But Mel does flirt outrageously with Jon. There was that line about touching his wolf, and there's all the smiles and small touches and friendly advice that she gives him. And then she even impersonated Ygritte for a hot second. That was very unfair. Very unfair. Very unfair. But of course, this is about magic. Mel has two kinds of sex magic. And leave a comment below with your favorite track off of Blood Sugar Sex Magic. I'd probably have to go with Sir Psycho Sexy. So yeah, two kinds of sex magic: shadow baby making and the fiery kiss of R'hllor. And again, she may or may not already know how to do that, but she should be able to, and I'm sure she'll figure it out. Jon is like Sleeping Beauty. That's right there. But getting back to the flirting, Mel sure does like the look of Jon's shadow. The Lord of Light in his wisdom made us male and female, two parts of a greater whole. In our joining there is power. Power to make life. Power to make light. Power to cast shadows. Shadows. The world seemed darker when he said it. Every man who walks the earth casts a shadow on the world. Some are thin and weak, others long and dark. You should look behind you, Lord Snow. The moon has kissed you and etched your shadow upon the ice 20 feet tall. Jon glanced over his shoulder. The shadow was there, just as she had said, etched in moonlight against the wall. So technically, I don't think that's even physically possible for the moon in the sky to be striking Jon and casting a 20-foot... It'd have to be like a campfire that Jon was standing in front of, but... The point being, George wrote this line for symbolism, not physics. This is about Melisandre, who is as pale as the moon, kissing Jon back to life and resurrecting him as a giant, terrible shadow. But just taking Mel at face value, in these lines, she's clearly talking about making a shadow baby with Jon. She's saying male and female, we could make life, meaning a baby, or, we could make a shadow baby. And again, when she's thinking about the wall as a hinge of the world, she thinks to herself that such shadows as I bring forth here will be terrible, and no creature of the dark will stand before them. So she really wanted to make a shadow baby here at the wall with Jon, but Jon is, of course, dead. I'm not sure if a resurrected person can peel off any of their life fires to make shadow babies. I mean, maybe, but I don't think so. Seems like a resurrected person is already low on life fires. And I do think this instead refers to Jon's resurrected form, which will be a big, terrible shadow. And this will happen when the world darkens. And then going back to the line about Jon's shadow being etched into the ice, I think that refers to the idea of shadow binding Jon's spirit back to his body, which will be frozen in some sense. So here's why I don't think that Melisandre can make a shadow baby with resurrected Jon. So think about this with me, okay? Normally creating a shadow baby involves splitting off life fires from the father in order to cast the shadow. Jon, however, is already split and actually needs to be recombined. So he kind of needs the reverse process of a shadow baby. His ghost will need to be ported out of the wolf and bound or reattached somehow to his corpse, which will itself need to be reanimated. Now, luckily for Jon, and as I discussed in the Shadowbinders video, thanks for watching, the R'hllorist resurrection appears to be shadow binding because you're essentially binding a ghost to their corpse, as opposed to restoring life to the body. So R'hllorist resurrection is in fact the reverse process of shadow binding. Instead of splitting a shadow off from someone's body, we're reattaching it to someone's body. And so, even though Melisandre thought she wanted to make she did want to make a shadow baby with Jon, she's going to have to instead settle for resurrecting Jon, which will be like making a giant shadow. And of course, to do this, she will have to kiss Jon, so there will be a little bit of sex magic involved. Or maybe she'll go full Isis and Osiris, and I'm not even going to talk about that. We'll just see if George writes it, and then I'll comment on it.
Well, he's gone to be a soldier in the army of the
So this
Lord.
recombination thing is really important, and Martin alludes to these two halves of Jon that need to be combined in two very important scenes. One of them is the fight outside of Bloodraven's cave between Bran and Jojen and Mira and Hodor and Cold Hands and all the Cold Whites. And of course, there's also the Children of the Forest there, helpfully setting the Whites on fire. The Whites, Bran realized. Someone set the Whites on fire. Summer was snarling and snapping as he danced around the closest, a great ruin of a man wreathed in swirling flame. He shouldn't get so close. What is he doing? Then he saw himself, sprawled face down in the snow. Summer was trying to drive the thing away from him. So Bran is obviously inside of Hodor here, watching Summer try to protect Bran's comatose body. That's what's going on. And the fight, as we read, is between Summer the wolf and a man wreathed in flame. That's an ice white that's been set on fire by the children of the forest, just as Jon's body may be temporarily ice-whited and possessed by the others before Melisandre frees it with fire. Summer is, of course, a Stark direwolf, so that stands in for Ghost pretty well. And so yeah, we've got the two halves of Jon's resurrection, a Stark direwolf and a frozen dead man that's been set on fire. In both scenes that we're going to look at, it's a woman setting the fire. Here it is Leaf, child of the forest, and of course at Jon's potential resurrection it will be Mel setting the fire. Although Bran may well be involved using Child of the Forest magic as well. So essentially what we see here is that Summer the wolf and Leaf are working together to protect Bran's unconscious body and, quote, drive the thing away from him. Just as Melisandre and Ghost will work together to drive the ice white possession from Jon's corpse, his comatose body. So that's all really tight foreshadowing. And then of course, Cold Hands is also right there, and he is a skin changer zombie Night's Watchman, who is also foreshadowing Jon. And as we discussed in the video, the most likely explanation for Cold Hands is that he was ice-whited by the others and then freed by the children, just as Jon is going to be ice-whited by the others and then freed by Melisandre and perhaps Bran and perhaps Bloodraven. They're just going to run a train. I'm sorry, they're going to run a train on Jon, but he needs help. He needs help. So apologizing again for the previous sentence and moving on, Bran is also body-snatching Hodor here. And Hodor is like a walking King of Winter archetype, straight from the crypts, straight from the underground, straight from the underground crypts of Winterfell. So Hodor, he has a frozen beard here, so a snow beard like Edric Snowbeard, a King of Winter. His tears freeze in his eyes, so he's got ice eyes like Brandon Ice Eyes Stark. And he's doing battle with an iron sword from the crypts that used to belong to a King of Winter. Even cooler is the fact that it is a black iron sword with a bit of red rust on it, so just as Ned's ice, the family Stark sword has been turned into Oathkeeper and Widow's Wail, which are now streaked black and red, Hodor is walking around with a black and red sword. Pretty awesome. So yes, Hodor is a walking King of Winter archetype here, and it is Bran who has animated him to fight the others, right as we see the wolf and the burning man dancing. So this would definitely seem like it alludes to Bran having a hand in Jon's resurrection. And in fact, I suspect that this is the true reason why Melisandre saw Bran and Bloodraven in her vision. Not because they're the great other and her true enemy, and Bloodraven might actually be her father. Check out the linked theory in the description below the video. It may be that Mel will have to work with Bran and or Bloodraven to resurrect Jon. You know, to run the resurrection train over Jon's body. And as I alluded to earlier, the King of Winter mythology is implied here because the ice white lit on fire is wreathed in flame. So Christmas wreath, burning Christmas man, King of Winter. And again, the King of Winter is a version of a straw man or wicker man made of harvest shoots who is burned in the spring to help usher in the spring. The whites are like straw men, so yeah, Jon's going to be a burning straw man, a King of Winter, and that's what basically all the symbolism in this scene is about, resurrecting Jon as a King of Winter to fight the others. So the other scene, remember I said there were two scenes with the wolf and the fireman dancing together, is Mirri Maz Duur's Tent of Dancing Shadows, as I like to call it. And that is, of course, the tent where she turned Drogo into a vegetable of some kind. So both this scene in the tent and the subsequent burning of Drogo on the funeral pyre are very heavily foreshadowing Jon's resurrection in his funeral pyre, as I'm about to show you through the rest of this video, basically. Drogo's pyre is, of course, where Dany begins to fulfill the Azor Ahai prophecy and wakes the dragons from stone. So it makes sense that Jon's scene fulfilling the Azor Ahai prophecy would mirror Dany's, and indeed, it's going to. We've got a funeral pyre, animal sacrifice, human sacrifice, symbolic resurrection, and a witch from Ashai using shadow magic and singing. So yeah, those are all the ingredients that we need to resurrect Jon. And so here's the quote from A Game of Thrones. Inside the tent the shapes were dancing, circling the brazier and the bloody bath, dark against the sand silk, and some did not look human. She glimpsed the shadow of a great wolf, and another like a man wreathed in flames. All right, so once again, the same pairing, the wolf and the fiery man. And again, the fiery man is wreathed in flames like a King of Winter. That phrase, the shadow of a great wolf, well, that's a perfect description of Ghost, the Stark direwolf. A direwolf is a great wolf, and a ghost wolf and a shadow wolf are basically the same idea. So once again, it's the two halves of Jon that need to be recombined. And performing the spell is Mirri Maz Duur, who, again, is a witch from Ashai using shadow magic, just like Melisandre. So I think what Mirri Maz Duur is is doing here is actually a skin changer resurrection ceremony, except for that Drogo isn't a skin changer and isn't bonded to his horse like that. But if you imagine Drogo as a skin changer, and I do think the Dothraki once upon a time used to be horse skin changers. I'll actually have a video coming out about that soon, about the Ifukevron, after I do Dothraki 2, which is still coming soon. Sooner than Winds of Winter, probably. But yes, think about this as if Drogo is a skin changer bonded to his horse. Mirri Maz Duur slits the horse's throat and says, "Strength of the horse, go into the rider." So in other words, she's transferring some sort of essence, some sort of power from the animal back to the dead or near-dead comatose human. She's even got a First Man-style bronze sickle knife. That's cool. It's a pretty good match for Bran's vision of the Weirwood sacrifice in the Winterfell Gods Wood. And so essentially, what I think Mirri Maz Duur is doing here is using the Skin Changer Resurrection spell on Drogo, knowing that it's not going to work and will just render him a vegetable. And in fact, Mirri may have put the horse brain inside of Drogo. Don't! She did heal his body, though. She did do that, so yeah, we'll give that to her. And so basically my point is that this same spell performed by Mel on Jon and Ghost would, I think, resurrect Jon. It would be more like Spirit of the Wolf go into the man, but that's pretty much the idea. Perhaps this scene implies that Melisandre will sacrifice Ghost with a knife, but I still think it's going to be fire. And of course, a horse of course, is burned in Drogo's pyre right after this. So yes, all the way back in A Game of Thrones, I think George is foreshadowing the mechanics of Jon's resurrection. It does kind of make sense that George would be thinking about this already because Jon dying and being resurrected is seemingly such a major part of his plot. So it's probably something George was planning from the beginning. Okay, so final point, as you may recall, Dany, before she burns Drogo, she snuffs him out with a pillow, mercifully. And before she does that, I'm sure you will remember that she tries to revive him, or resurrect him, you might even say, with a bit of sexy time. It seemed like a weird scene, and it still is, but it's probably meant to foreshadow Melisandre resurrecting Jon with the fiery kiss of R'hllor. Or again, maybe going full Isis and Osiris. Go look it up if you don't know what I mean, but it means what you think it means, so go look it up.
He's loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword.
As we all know, only death can pay for life, and that means it's time for a sacrifice. So what will the scene of Jon's resurrection look like, you ask? Well, almost exactly like Drogo's pyre. And I did already make a video about this one time, but we're going to go deeper today, and I found some new stuff. So first off, and as I mentioned earlier, it makes a lot of sense for George to create parallels between the scene of Drogo's pyre, where Dany began to fulfill the prophecy of Azor High Reborn, and Jon's resurrection, where he will begin doing the same thing. And by the way, I do think the Red Comet is going to come back in the Winds of Winter. It's going to help cause the new Long Night after all, and I think this will happen in time, either for Jon's resurrection or, if his body is stolen from the others, for the freeing of his body from otherish possession. So that'll help us recognize that, we're doing Azor High Reborn stuff if there's a comet in the sky when Mel is burning Jon's body. And another reason that these scenes should be obvious parallels is the rebirth aspect. Dany walks into the fire and is sort of symbolically, figuratively, spiritually reborn, while Jon literally needs to be resurrected. So this would appear to be the reborn part of the Azor High Reborn archetype. It's not just that original Azor High is somehow reincarnated, but rather that both of these characters are transformed and reborn in fire, whether it's figuratively or literally, as Jon will be. Now, no dragons will be woken from stone in Jon's pyre, save for Jon himself. He's going to be the dragon. You saw that coming, didn't you? So there are some Jon Azor High skeptics who groan at this idea, but it's really well set up in the Mystery Night. So the plot of the Mystery Night, as you will recall, it takes place at Castle White Walls near the God's Eye. And at the tourney at White Walls, there's a fellow named Jon the Fiddler who shows up, and he turns out to be another Daemon Blackfyre. It's kind of a Scooby-Doo meme moment. But the point is, he's a Targaryen descendant in disguise under the name Jon the Fiddler, just as Jon Snow's dad was a harpist. So Jon the Fiddler, he dreams of a dragon hatching at White Walls before they ever come there. And then at the end of the story, Bloodraven explains that that dream depiction of a dragon hatching was actually a reference to Egg, and him coming into his own as a Targaryen, throwing off his disguise, and owning up to the fact that he is Aegon Targaryen, heir to the, eventual heir to the Seven Kingdoms. So that means there were actually two Targaryens in disguise, both Egg and Jon the Fiddler, and Bloodraven, who was Maynard Plum. Spoiler alert, that's same guy. So 3 Targaryens in disguise, and one of them was named Jon, whose identity was revealed by Bloodraven and some kid. Bloodraven and some kid helped the world realize that Jon was actually a Targaryen. The Blackfires they're still Targaryens, guys. So yeah, it happened at White Walls. So his identity reveal as a Targaryen is going to happen at the big White Wall. It's foreshadowing. And of course, the point is that a Targaryen coming into their own, realizing their identity, this can be perceived in a dragon dream as the hatching of a dragon. So Jon, who will likely be wandering the dream crypts of Winterfell when he's dead, he's probably going to get resurrected and know that he is Jon Targaryen, or Aemon whatever his name turns out to be. Let me know in the comments. I'm an Aemon believer myself. But yeah, when he wakes up with his Targaryen identity, that will be like a dragon hatching. And thus, the fulfillment of the prophecy. All right, so the Drogo's pyre, Jon's resurrection pyre parallel goes like this. Jon is Drogo. Obviously, he's the dead guy getting set on fire. Melisandre will play the role of Daenerys, lighting the pyre and conducting the ritual. Shireen will be, sadly, she's going to be sacrificed in place of Mirri Maz Duur. We know it's going to happen, and this is where it's going to happen. And then Ghost, as I mentioned, he's going to play the role of the sacrificed animal. There was a horse burned, Drogo's actual pyre, and of course his red stallion was sacrificed during Mirri Maz Duur's tent ritual. So that's the basics. Now let's go deeper. Jon is Drogo, the dead man who needs burning. But Drogo isn't just burnt, of course. His spirit appears to rise from the flames mounted on his smoky stallion, to ascend up to the red comet, which then becomes his new starry mount, his fiery celestial steed. Now, the red comet is, of course, a symbol of Azor Ahai, and also just the symbol of a dragon straight up. So riding the red comet is basically like riding a dragon, and like being Azor Ahai. And so, as you can see, this perfectly foreshadows Jon, who is going to rise from the pyre as Azor Ahai reborn, with red stars, bleeding red stars for eyes, just like the comet. And Jon will probably also ride a dragon, just like Drogo's riding the dragon comet. Drogo, throughout the story, is actually compared to a dragon lord several times. It's a little weird, but I think it's all done to foreshadow Jon, because Drogo is Dany's first husband, and Jon will be Dany's last husband. Although husband, let's not get technical. And then, as you'll also probably recall, it's not just Drogo who appears to rise from the flames. It's also his smoky stallion. So that's another clue about Ghost being whited, which again, we'll come back to in next week's video. But yeah, the animal that was sacrificed on the pyre also rose from the flames. And Ghost, of course, his eyes have already been compared to Melisandre's eyes and to two red suns, which are red stars. So he compares very well to the idea of Drogo's mount being the red comet. All right, so next, Shireen as Mirri Maz Duur. In case you didn't know, it's been confirmed by Dave and Dan and George, essentially, that some form of the sacrifice of Shireen will also happen in the books. And Melisandre definitely has been building up to the idea of sacrificing a child, which is basically the ultimate evil. And we'll come back to this topic of Mel's morality and loss of humanity in the final section. So you'll notice the idea of Shireen playing the role of Mirri Maz Duur is kind of an age switch. Dany is a teenage girl sacrificing an old woman and a witch, whereas Melisandre is an incredibly old woman and a witch sacrificing a teenage girl, with Shireen having her own dragon symbolism because of the grayscale and her having been raised on Dragonstone just like Dany. Shireen, of course, has a nightmare, or perhaps repeated nightmares, about dragons coming to eat her. Perhaps that's because she grew up in a castle with gigantic carved stone dragon mouths everywhere, and also because she's going to be sacrificed in Jon's pyre, which will be like the waking of a dragon because Jon's Azor Ahai reborn. So yes, in terms of symbolism, Jon's pyre is the dragon fire that is consuming Shireen. And Shireen's grayscale, as you probably guess, will be the from stone part. Jon will be resurrected through the sacrifice of the stone girl. And flipping back over to Drogo's pyre, Dany later has a dream of a dragon bursting from the forehead of Mirri Maz Duur, because Mirri Maz Duur was sacrificed to hatch the dragon. So symbolically, Jon the dragon will spring from the stone forehead of Shireen. And I'm sorry, this is all very upsetting for me to talk about as well as for you to listen to. There's really no softening it. All I can do is explain the symbolism that's going to line up here, and we'll cope with it when it happens. So lightening things up a bit, we'll talk about Ghost, him being sacrificed like the stallions. Lots of people will watch this video. All right, so if Jon has merged with Ghost inside his wolf body, as we know happens with skin changers after they die and they begin second life, after a few days, the man spirit and the wolf spirit will begin to merge. If that process has begun to happen, then the only way to put Jon's spirit back in his body will be to bring the wolf spirit too, because they may be inseparable. And this means the wolf body will need to be sacrificed, either slain or burned or both. And remember, Drogo's red stallion had its throat cut in the tent, while the other horse was burned on his pyre. Now, as many of you will know, a lot of the ghost sacrifice foreshadowing symbolism has to do with Jon as Mithras. Mithras, who was called Rock-born for his depiction emerging from a stone egg with a sword and a torch. So basically, he's a Lightbringer hero hatching from an egg like a dragon. And the most common scene that we have found depicting Mithras is known as the Tauroctony, very famous, and it depicts Mithras sacrificing the white bull, which is thought to be his friend and a willing sacrifice, and is thought to aid his resurrection. And by the way, everything we know about Roman Mithraism is highly speculative. We don't have much. But what we do have is a lot of depictions of Rock-born Mithras and a lot of depictions of the Tauroctony. So if you know anything about Mithras, you know that the white bull has to be slain for him to be reborn, and at Jon's birth, Gerald Hightower, the White Bull, is slain. That's the entire reason why he's got that nickname, the White Bull. So he can die at Jon's birth and help us figure out that Jon is Mithras. That was Jon's birth, of course, and at Jon's rebirth, the White Bull role will obviously be played by Ghost, Jon's White Wolf. Ghost's sacrifice will literally facilitate Jon's resurrection, so he can be reborn from stone with a sword that is also a torch. And then I couldn't help but notice Gerald Hightower the White Bull is one of 3 sacrifices at Jon's birth, and just as there were 3 sacrifices at Drogo's pyre, there will be 3 sacrifices, theoretically, at Jon's resurrection pyre. Shireen, Ghost, and, spoiler alert, Melisandre. So these are probably all intended as parallels to the 3 attempts to forge Lightbringer. And even at Mirri Maz Duur's sort of botched vegetabilization of Drogo, we saw 3 sacrifices as well. The stallion, baby Rhaego, and Drogo, who was, again, vegetabilized. Oh yes, and baby Rhaego, a child with scales, just like Shireen. So lots of parallels, and we've already seen how Melisandre will be able to call Ghost to the fire, and the detailed foreshadowing that she will do just that. And that leaves Melisandre as Daenerys, the magical woman conducting the fire ritual. So just as Daenerys thinks to herself that the dragons are fire made flesh, and so am I, Melisandre is more literally fire made flesh, or I guess you'd say flesh made fire. So Daenerys, when she first started out trying to save Drogo, she was as desperate to save Drogo as Mel essentially will be when she figures out that Jon is Azor High, but dead and in need of resurrection. So there'll be the same level of urgency, and they'll both be sort of intuiting what to do. Dany was relying on dreams and stuff Mirri Maz Duur said, and just gut intuition. And like we were saying before, it is possible that Mel already knows about Rhaegar's resurrection, but it's also very possible that she doesn't know that that's what she's supposed to do and will sort of somehow figure it out. And then finally, Dany walks into the pyre to perform her ritual. And so too will Melisandre walk into the fire.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Where she will become Omni-Mel. Something like that. I don't know. It's going to be her Obi-Wan Kenobi moment. She's going to appear to give up her life, to be struck down, but she'll become more powerful than anyone could guess. And of course, for Obi-Wan Kenobi, that was true because he became a Force ghost, and then he was able to advise Luke in the cockpit. In the crucial moment when he blew up the Death Star, spoiler alert. Obi-Wan is chaotic good, by the way. Don't use the guidance computer. Just use your, feel it out. That's chaotic good. We like that. Anyway, I do think that Mel, walking into the pyre, will become an insubstantial fire spirit. That's kind of like a Force ghost, but more importantly, think of the others and the shadow babies and how they're both mostly insubstantial, but can become solid when they need to stab someone. So basically, this is Mel finishing her transformation into a fire other by expending a ton of magic to resurrect Jon. Her walking into the pyre will essentially be a sign that she has left her physical body behind. So Melisandre's new powers as a fire other could include such abilities as the power to teleport. The others, I think, can do this. Check out the Ice Spiders video. Melisandre may be able to whisper in Jon's ear or other people's ears, very like Obi-Wan does for Luke. And in this way, she may be able to accompany Jon and Dany into the heart of winter, which is a plot act that I think is coming. Melisandre probably won't be able to have shadow babies since she doesn't have a physical form anymore, but who knows? That's hard to say. I do think she'll be able to create more fire wights, and perhaps this will be easier for her. And as we know, there's just a ton of foreshadowing for this, such as Jon's Azor Ahai dream. He's fighting the undead with Lightbringer, and his only companions are the Scarecrow Sentinels, named after the fallen Night's Watch brothers. In the dream, they've caught on fire, so they're dead Night's Watchmen who are like straw men, which is how the wights are all described, and they're burning. So then we think about Beric, a fire wight, because he's burning with the fire of V'lor, and he's described as a Scarecrow Knight. Beric has a burning sword, like Jon, of course, and Beric is a black-cloaked do-gooder leading a brotherhood, just like Jon. So essentially, Beric is all over Jon's dream. Jon himself will be like Beric, a fire wight with a burning sword, V'lor's champion, but those burning scarecrows, because of Beric's symbolism, are spelled out as fire wight brothers also. And where are they going to come from? I don't know. Wait, we do know. Fire Other Melisandre. Another clue about the Fire Wights Watch is the line about all those who die fighting in Azor Ahai's cause, being reborn. As I always like to say, that is not just figurative language, and because the V'lorist ritual known as the Fiery Kiss actually does give rebirth to people, it now seems that this line is literal, and that there will actually be reborn, resurrected people fighting for the cause of Azor Ahai Reborn, who himself will be resurrected in Jon's case. And one of my favorite clues about Jon leading a Fire Wight's watch of V'lor resurrected Night's Watchmen is the fiery hand symbolism. So when we go to the Temple of V'lor, we see that the 1,000 Fire Knight soldiers of V'lor are known collectively as the Fiery Hand. Jon has a fiery hand. He burnt his hand fighting against the Whites, which is what Azor Ahai Reborn is supposed to be reborn to do. So yeah, expect Jon to lead the fight against the others as the leader of his own fiery hand battalion of V'lorist resurrected soldiers.
He captured Harper's Ferry with his 19 men so true.
No word on whether or not they'll live in the Flint Barracks at Castle Black. The Flint Barracks, yeah, barracks where soldiers live. Fire White soldiers who will be like Beric Dondarrion in the Flint Barracks with Flint, you know, you can wake fire from stone with it. And even the legend of brave Dany Flint seems like it could allude to Daenerys coming to the wall and helping to lead the Fire Whites. So the reason why I said that Melisandre may actually be better at making fire wights as a fire other herself is because Thoros seems to be a little bit more drained every time he brings Beric back from the dead. But Melisandre, not having a physical form, there may not be anything to be drained. So that's a pretty awesome destiny, not only resurrecting Jon and Ghost, stay tuned for next week's video, but also whipping up a bunch more fire wights and buzzing around and giving people advice and just generally helping this entire army of the living and the undead defeat the bad zombie. You understand what I'm saying. So that's really cool. But she burned a child. Or will have by this time. So think about this. Committing great acts of evil, essentially, is akin to killing your own humanity. This is very similar to how Martin writes about revenge. You take it out on other people, but it also extracts quite a bit from you as well. So burning a child, it's inhuman. And Mel will be literally giving up her humanity as she does this final abominable act. So this will be a magic transformation that essentially parallels the theme of her story. Fanaticism that goes too far and leads to a loss of humanity. So Melisandre probably will have a good time making a bunch of fire wights, but one doesn't imagine that she has much of a future past the winter. So I actually do think it's going to end on an emotional beat a lot like the show, where we see that Melisandre has, at the last, basically given absolutely everything for the cause, for better or for worse. So very trademark George Martin Grey character. And yeah, thanks for watching this giant Melisandre video. And next week's Fire White Ghost video will be a good bit shorter, but I've got some really cool finds in there for you. So yeah, make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you next week with that video.
He's loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on.